What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of HR Heretics. Today we have Iain Roberts on the show. And Iain, you have a very interesting background. You're a designer by trade. You worked at IDEO for like 15, 20 years, something like that. You ended up working at Ford for a little while. Mostly you were operating on the product and design side. And then in 2023, you joined Airbnb to lead people and culture. Can you help us understand, like, how does one go from a design background into leading people and culture at Airbnb?
Yeah, for sure. It's been a journey, but I think if I go all the way back, right? I remember parent-teacher conversation where my mom and my dad were sat down with my art teacher, and he said to them, "Hey, what are you going to do with this kid?" I was taking maths and physics and art at the time as my A levels in the UK, and my art teacher said to my mom and dad, "Everything needs to be designed." And that idea of everything needs to be designed kind of like stuck with me for the last 30 years of my career, right? From going to university to become an engineer and then going to art school to actually exercise my desire to be a designer through to, 25 years as a practicing designer. I would say that the first half of my time as a designer, I spent a lot of time working with technology companies, legacy companies, designing the stuff, right? Designing the product or the service or the digital experience that they were trying to ship out into the world. I designed cars and cell phones and hospitality experiences, you name it. And then the second half of my career in the design profession was asking the question, why is it so difficult for organizations to get those new ideas through themselves and out into the world? And so for that second decade, I spent much more time designing how organizations work and actually figuring out how they can get new ideas through their structures to deliver new growth and new innovation out into the world. And so it's a little bit of the journey of like designing from designing things to designing organizations. And when Brian and the team initially called me at Airbnb in 2023, it definitely took me by surprise. In a weird way, I'd considered what I was doing a design practice, but I hadn't really considered the place to do it was from the seat of HR. And it took a lot of conversations between Brian and myself and the executive team to truly believe they were committed to this idea. But when that light bulb went off and Brian and I bonded over the idea of designing the organization together, it felt like a natural fit.
I love that everything needs to be designed. And if I asked, let's say 10 people that, I might get 7 different answers. And I'd love to hear your answer on that, Iain. Like, what does that mean in your head?
What does it mean? It means that things don't happen by accident, right? It means that we're constantly shaping the environment and the systems around us, whether or not we're designing a product or a service. At the end of the day, it is a conscious act of shaping people, systems, and technology to try and get the outcome that you want. And so you can take that idea and I think you can play it out in a more traditional setting. How do we get people to organize together to bend sheet metal and like design software so that we design a new car? Or we can start to think about it truly from the organizational sense. And if you think about it, Airbnb is just 7,000 people, right? The classic idea that like we're a very capital light company. All we have is 7,000 people. And so the design effort here is designing the system of the right people working on the right things in the right way, in the right organizational structures. That's the entire ball game. It's a massive and a huge design challenge, and one that I'm incredibly privileged to have the opportunity to work on.
Yeah. So you've been at it now at Airbnb for about a year and a half. And I can imagine if I was like at Airbnb in an HR recruiting role, seeing you announced as the leader being like, what the hell is Brian thinking? So how have you, like, number one, won the hearts and minds of the people who have been doing this work for a long time? And then I think the second thing is, what has been surprising to you just making this gigantic career transition?
Yeah, and such good questions. I think there was definitely a bit of a sticker shock, right? In terms of like, again, what? There's a person coming in to lead the function and not from an HR background. It certainly, I think, didn't add up to a lot of people, internally and externally. But I have learned that the way that Brian wants to approach this problem like the people problem, the people opportunity in Airbnb, is innately a creative and design one, right? And so year one of my work in that organization has been to try and bring creative problem solving approaches into what we call EX, our people and culture, or our employee experience team, to help the team understand that best practices is always a foundation and a baseline from which we can build new thinking to really solve the problems that we're seeing out in the business. And so like a lot of the work that we've done in the first year has actually been really thinking about how we can solve problems differently as a people and culture team, and begin to really help them understand that we are here as a service function, yes, but we need to be a strategic service function that is shaping how the organization evolves, is designed, the talent and the capabilities that built within it. So it's been a lot of that journey of trying to like build the confidence and the courage in the team, build some of the capabilities so that we can act as a much more strategic set of advisors to our executive clients. Your question about what's maybe been most surprising has been actually how transferable my consulting skills were. From 22 years of being a design consultant, or in that last decade, being much more in the transformation side of things, so much of what I need to do on a day-to-day basis is advise our executive team, my peers, to help them understand what needs to change in order that we can be fit for the future. And a lot of what I did spend the last 10 years doing is very applicable, even though I've never done it inside of a technology company before. And then maybe the last thing I'll add is I'm learning a lot of new stuff as well. Like clearly there is a ton of craft, real craft in the HR space that is often invisible, right? And I'm having to actually learn, I think, the practice of great HR at the same time. And the good news there is I have a really strong bench who knows how to do that already. And my hope is that what we're able to do is add the two parts of our capability set together and create something kind of new and interesting in the future.
Talk to me a little bit about top-down versus bottom-up design thinking. So specifically what I'm getting at is Airbnb's 7,000 people-ish, right? I can imagine, you and Brian in a lab cooking up ideas on how you want the culture to operate. I can also imagine team A does things one way and team B does it an entirely different way. How do you think about like the top-down of what the executive team wants versus like what might be best for each team individually?
I've been wrestling with that one for sure. Maybe I'll start by saying, maybe describing how some of the consistent structures work at Airbnb. So 7,000 people organized into quite a pure functional design, functional organizational structure. We have a single product team, a single design team, a single engineering team. There are no GMs. It's all a number of supervisory functions, all working towards one roadmap. That's what's quite unique about Airbnb. 7,000 people all working on one roadmap where we're launching new feature upgrades, new services to our guests and host community once every 6 months. So that gives you like a way of organizing and a meter and a focus that's quite unheard of actually in many of the organizations that I've consulted with in the past, right? So that top-downness that Brian has imposed on the roadmap, the one roadmap, I think works incredibly well to make sure that we're all very focused on what we're trying to execute the next half and the next half and the next half. At the same time, though, I really believe that change in an organization happens through movements, not just mandates, right? And so to your point about bottom up, you really do need to acknowledge that there's great innovation happening in the functions, in the teams. And a lot of my job is to shine a light, right, on the amazing work that's happening in different pockets of the organization, and where applicable, pick it up and figure out how can we influence people to scale great ideas across the organization, because it's not a mandate, because we've seen and demonstrated its success somewhere else. And so for me, it's always a blend between the two of like just enough top down to give you structure, to give you scaffolding from which you can operate, and an acknowledgement that actually you need to bring along a movement, you need to bring along a culture in order to affect change over time that sticks.
And also that's where innovation can come from too, right? Like by letting people test new things, we can then take those learnings and apply them in a more broad setting.
Absolutely. And when I talk about innovation, I think about it really broadly. There's the innovation on the product side for sure, But innovation is full stack, right? It's down to how we innovate our service delivery in the people and culture function, how our global operations teams innovate on customer service. There's room for it across the entire enterprise. It's not just about the products that we're shipping to our guests and our hosts.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about those that are listening, right? And I think this is it's cool, right? Not a lot of companies are talking about this or approach it this way. And so my question, Iain, is how did you tactically wrap the HR team's head around this? Just because the organizations I've worked with and I work with now, and advise for, this is not, for most of them, the way that they just approach things. So what did you do when you came in? How did you take those first steps out the gate with them?
A lot of listening, right? I think many people might say I'm maybe a little slower moving than they might have expected because I don't have a playbook for this, right? It's not like I've done this 3 times before and I'm rolling out the playbook from years and years of experience to say this is the right way to transform what we are now into what we need to be in the future. So the only way I know how to do that is to do the research, right? Like design and research go hand in hand. Creative problem solving requires you to have an innate sense of curiosity and empathy for like, what are the real problems that we need to solve? And I would say for my first 90 days, I was very much in listening and learning mode to identify where did we have gaps? And I mean that as a people and culture function, but also as an organization. And where were the opportunities to lean into and design in those spaces? Year 1 was about putting the foundations in place. So back to this idea of I don't have a playbook. Year 1 is putting the foundations in place. Year 2 that we're just entering into now, I'm talking a lot to my team about the idea of us delivering products and services internally, right? So if Airbnb is a product and a service that delivers to guests and hosts in the world, and we are very product and design driven as an organization, how can we take that same philosophy into people and culture and really ask ourselves the question, what are our products and services that we're delivering? Where do they need to be high touch? Where can they be automated? Where can software be part of the delivery mechanism? Where does it need to be a person? And how can we orchestrate the service that we're delivering to the organization to truly solve employees and leaders' needs in a way that the HR function hasn't done before?
Yeah, I was on a panel a few months ago and we were talking about AI and people teams and the work and how that shifts. And I threw it out there. I said, look, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a new job title in the people function. It's a people product manager or something like that. And do you have one of those? I mean, you might have one of those now. Or have you thought about that? Because I haven't seen it yet, but I could definitely see a new career path around HR product management.
I completely agree with you. It's a conversation my leadership team and I have begun treading into. There was an article posted on LinkedIn recently by Jensen Huang from the NVIDIA CEO talking about how IT was going to become the people product management team of the future because AI agents. And I sent that around to my team and I was like, let's debate this. What do we think about that? And for me, we have to be charting new territory in that space. We have to be being bold enough to say we're going to fundamentally think about how product management inside the HR or people function will need to evolve so that we can deliver deliver against customer expectations and our client expectations. So we're doing the things you'd expect us to be doing. We've already delivered some basic AI agent kind of bot-like infrastructure that allows us to solve very simple tickets. And we're building a roadmap that will allow us to build on that capability over time. I'm excited to see where this goes. And I don't think anybody right now knows because it's quite a fractured marketplace. So I think anybody who's at the edges and experimenting we should all be learning from each other.
Yep.
Hey, everyone. We'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
I must admit, I used to believe that AI didn't actually exist in recruiting or HR. That is until my friend Heather Doche, who leads talent at Signalfire, told me to check out Metaview. I got into the product and was like, wow, AI actually does exist in recruiting, and this product is sick. Metaview is the world's #1 AI scribe built specifically for recruiting. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. I've seen firsthand how tough it can be to extract consistently high-quality data from candidate conversations. I've been in debriefs where interviewers told us about their feelings instead of what actually happened in the interview. And I've seen VPs and CEOs block hires because they didn't learn anything from skeleton scorecards. Metaview changes everything. With perfect notes from every conversation, your people can focus on creating a human connection with candidates, and they can save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Metaview covers all your compliance needs, works with all your existing tools, and takes less than 3 minutes to set up. Join talent leaders at organizations like Brex, Deal, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts. Tell them that me and Kelly sent you. Or you could just go to their website and get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes. So let's talk a little bit about Brian's comments regarding founder mode. And I actually think a lot of these comments got taken way out of context. So I'll give you my read, and then I would love to hear your read. So my read of what he said to Paul Graham was essentially the traditional advice when you hire an executive is you hire that person and then you just get out of their way and you let them operate, and then they tell you what they're doing. Brian's view on that traditional advice is that it's broken. And it's broken because they can be off doing stuff that you're not aware of and you're misaligned with. But because they run such large swaths of the organization, it can start feeling like that part of the organization is drifting into a direction that is not in the same direction as the rest of the company. And so Brian's also talked a little bit about being in the details. And I think this ties in together with founder mode, which is essentially he's saying, trust and verify, right? Which is I give you a mandate, we're aligned on the mandate. And then as you keep working, I basically have spot checks to make sure that what we had agreed on initially is still true today. And as it becomes into reality, that's exactly what's going on here. Do I have that right? Or what am I wrong about as it relates to the way Brian thinks about founder mode?
It's a much debated topic, right? For sure. And I think it has been a much misinterpreted topic, right? I think one of the things Brian talks about is this idea that leadership should be defined in its presence, not in its absence. And for me, what I found in working with Brian, perhaps not surprisingly, is he leads like a designer, right? And so at the heart, for me personally, in my experiences with Brian, he leads like a designer. What does that mean? It means he is highly collaborative in the way that he wants to work through problems. Right? Because innately in design is this idea of interdisciplinary collaboration, teams always being better at getting to the outcome that you want than any one individual. It's like so deeply rooted into design practice, design education, and you can see it in the way that I can see it in the way that Brian leads. And that can be challenging to some people, right? Who are used to being given the autonomy and the mandate to go off and do the thing and bring back the answer. Whereas actually how I found Brian really wants to work is he genuinely wants to roll up his sleeves and sit down next to you and work through problems together. And that's what it means to be in the details. And so the idea, Nolan, of like frequent iteration touch points that you're talking about, that's a design practice as well. It's called prototyping and iterating. And so my experience of working with Brian is exactly that. How do I get to be at the same side of the table as him, with my sleeves rolled up, collaborating on problems together, and then actually using his immense capacity to problem solve across all avenues of the business and use that to my benefit so that we're consistently advancing our thinking in lockstep. It's a different way of working. For many executives, it feels very familiar to me.
Nolan, that seems very different. That explanation seems extremely far away from what you explained founder mode to be. And this is not about you, but what I'm hearing out in the wild, which is kind of like we do with values at companies, like weaponizing this thing. I'm going to go into founder mode. Like that is a very different explanation.
Yeah, you're talking about micromanaging, right? And so this one's been in the oven for a little while for me since it came out. And I think, Kelly, you and I both had a very extreme adverse reaction to how it was being weaponized. And the weaponization is micromanagement, right? It's like the CEO is up your ass and around the corner on every single thing. Trust isn't established. And they like, in the details, as Brian says, is not just like, hey, we're aligning every week on this thing and we're working on problems together. It's like, I'm looking over your shoulder when you're doing the work. And Iain, what I'm hearing from you is actually like, no. This is just a modern way of management, right? So instead of, I think the antiquated way of management was we hire Iain, I get out of his way, I never bother him, I never like see what he's doing, and I just like trust it's happening. And then 6 months later, I'm like, holy shit, Iain, what have you been doing? Versus like now we're having a more established cadence and a cadence that is part of the expectation for how executives work here. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't want to comment on how people are misusing, or interpreting founder mode for themselves to their own benefit, right, and to their own goals. But I totally see your point that micromanagement, right? It's very easy to jump to the conclusion that therefore I need to make every decision on everything, and I literally need to do the work, and you're just my hands, right? And it doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like that to me here. Right. And I think that's the beauty in when it's done well, how it feels to truly be able to get to better outcomes together because you're actually working on the problem together, as opposed to talking about or presenting findings or recommendations. There's a real difference. It sounds nuanced. There's a real difference between working on the problem together and then presenting your findings to the CEO. And like I'm always firmly in the former camp, right, as opposed to the latter.
I just love talking about this because it accents for me. I mean, something I've seen in tech, in my 25 years in doing this is how it can quickly become this convoluted thing after a long game of telephone, and going back to the original intent of this versus how it can be taken and then used. And for me, it wasn't even micromanaging, Nolan. It was more, I'm almost like beast mode. I'm in founder mode. I'm going to kind of do all these things and I have agency to do that. And it's just interesting that it was the exact opposite in collaboration, actually.
Maybe I'll add as well, though, that, even the idea of having a single product roadmap with 7,000 people aligned towards one set of goals delivered on a deadline we say we're going to deliver it, which is how we operate, which is not how practically any other software company operates, pure software company operates, right? Or a marketplace company operates. That, for me, is just another great example of how Brian's using the management systems he's got at his fingertips to kind of drive the intensity we need, right, to be really successful. We don't just launch when ready and iterate out in the wild like many other software companies. We are conscious of the notion that every summer, every fall, we have a big release. Those releases should add up to something so that they are noticeable and meaningful to the market. And it requires a different way of working and a different level of intensity to really pull that off with excellence.
Yeah, but that's a new practice, right, Iain? Like that was something that Brian's come up with recently. And I guess where my curiosity goes there is, what caused that change? Like, why did he want to make that change to where you're doing the entire company is aligned to one product roadmap with 2 releases a year?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously wasn't there, so I can't comment on the specifics. But before the pandemic, Airbnb had grown incredibly quickly and was organized in a more traditional GM structure, where you had a GM of different service lines or different business lines in the organization. And I think Brian's been quite vocal about the idea that he felt like he was losing control of where was Airbnb going and what was it becoming. And so the leadership that he exhibited to get, and of course with the founders as well and the rest of the executive team, to navigate this organization through the pandemic, when everybody said, is this the end of Airbnb? to a radically successful IPO, to then this idea of we got to organize differently to get our house in order, to ensure that our foundational product works exceptionally well. And then we can build on top of that and earn the right to do the things that we want to do in the future around growth, right? That was a new thing in 2021. It's a new invention in the organization that's only 3-4 years old now, right? So we're learning our way into it. I think you can see, if you look at actually what we launch every half, you can see that the scale of the ambition is getting bigger and bolder every 6 months. I think something along the lines of we've launched 535 product upgrades in this new model over the last 4 or 5 years. So, it's working for us to be able to actually take effectively the same size organization and deliver much more with it over time. But it is a new invention. And as you mentioned, Nolan, like every half, we're reflecting upon what's working. How high can we set the bar on our ambition on the next half? What do we need to do to be able to deliver that? And it's thrilling to be in the middle of it.
It reminds me a little bit of Apple. So when Steve Jobs ran the company, right, the iPhone was released every year in September. And there'd be this big event and this big rollout, and then the new product would come out, and the entire company knew this is what we're working on for the course of the next year. The other thing, which I think is interesting with Brian, is that, Johnny Ive, who is famously the designer at Apple, has reportedly been working with you guys and working with Brian. And so I'm curious, like, how much influence does like the old Apple culture have on Brian?
I think Brian's creating the Airbnb way of doing things for sure. So I think it's easy on the outside to look and say, well, there's some simple connections you can make between Airbnb and Johnny, or Airbnb and Apple. But there's influence in this organization from many, many, many other aspects as well. If you think about the kinds of things we've tried to build in the last 5 to 6 years, the things we're building for the future at the moment. So there's definitely elements of organizational theory and organizational culture that I see from different types of companies, kind of like across not just the tech sphere, but beyond the tech sphere into entertainment and beyond. But that's the magic of this opportunity, Nolan, is the fact that we're getting to actually describe the Airbnb way of doing it. And so, I worked with Apple in a consulting capacity way back when at IDEO. The Apple culture had a lot of similarities to the IDEO culture, maybe not surprisingly, because both David Kelly and Steve Jobs were very, very, very close friends. They were together when Apple was kind of like producing the first computers. For me, what's more familiar in this organization is that it is a design-led organization. And it's truly got design in its DNA. And I don't just mean we care about what the product looks like or how the product works. Like, the details matter. How you do anything is how you do everything, right? And so that idea of like attention to detail and the design of the experience is innately part of who Airbnb is. And my hope, right, is that we'll have people in the future saying they're trying to copy how we've worked, right? Because it's been so radically successful as a model for innovating, as a model for customer centricity, and as a model for really showing what design can do in a modern technology organization.
Iain, you said something a few minutes ago or earlier, prototyping and iterating, right? Which is a big piece of this. And just to stay true to the Heretics name here and thinking about some of the devil's advocate, doing that with a product, a thing, a service is one thing. Prototyping and iterating with human experiences, right? People's jobs, their pay, that can be a little bit more difficult, right? And high stakes. So have you run into any of those, challenges? Because I'm just thinking about putting this into practice.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it was a question that myself and my old chief people officer at IDEO would debate a lot, which is, we took a lot of creativity and kind of like create a problem-solving approach to how we did the people function at IDEO that I've kind of like learned to bring in here as well. And you can't prototype the people's careers, right? So there is a line and there is a level that you need to kind of like say, we're not going to go beyond that. But you can do a lot more you can prototype in a way that goes a lot further beyond a product. So let me give a couple examples, right, of work we've done in the last year. So one of our signature parts of our employee value proposition at Airbnb is live and work anywhere. And live and work anywhere was our reaction to how do we deal with remote and hybrid work or flexible work? And it's a policy that we launched 2.5, 3 years ago. And we, in the last 12 to 24 months, have been consistently improving it, right? Almost treating it a little bit like a software launch. So if that was live and work anywhere 1.0, what's 1.1? What will be 1.2? What will be 1.3? How do we continuously improve it over time? And when I think about live and work anywhere, it's more than just our remote work policy, right? It's a philosophy for how we will work and how a modern, flexible workforce needs to work in the future. So let me talk about a couple of the experiments we've been running. The first is we've been deploying what I would call a gathering strategy approach. So we're actually saying, rather than just say to people, come into the office once a quarter, general guidance, or 3 days a week, or whatever your version of that is, we sit down with every function and we literally design a gathering strategy with that function that says, when do we believe you should come together for what purposes to do what work at what frequency throughout the year? And how does that begin to tie to an enterprise-wide gathering strategy that has these big tentpole moments called our launches? I am a firm believer that not all work should be done in the same way. And so a lot of the mandates that we see happening right now feel a little bit blunt force, because they don't recognize that the work of a finance organization is quite different to the work of a product development organization, is different to the work of an HR organization. And so a lot of what we've been working on is defining what's the kind of work that function does, and therefore what's our guidance and our guidelines around how we think that work should be done, and then how does that translate into a gathering strategy. So for our product development teams, they come together much more frequently to do the kind of like gnarly problem solving of like, what's the next thing we're going to launch, or the technical reviews of a software, of a code base. Whereas actually, if you think about our finance or our G&A functions, they're coming together less frequently for more community gathering, recommit to the mission and the purpose of actually that function. But we've been prototyping with that all of last year. And then the last thing that I think we've just begun instituting 6 months ago is for our most senior leaders, the people that are closest to the product launches, that really are the people that will help us be successful or not in our product launches. We recognize that most of those people were spending about 3-4 days a month in the office, primarily in our headquarters in San Francisco. So we just invited them to spend the same 3 to 4 days a month in the office. And we did in-person weeks. And in-person weeks was literally an invite. It's not a mandate. It's an invite from me to say, we think you should gather on this week. We'll do some light programming that will bring you together and make it better for you to be in the office together. But that's actually the time when you might want to schedule that kind of like deep problem solving work that's better done in person with your cross-functional partners. And so again, how we're working for me is a continuous act of prototyping, because anybody that's choosing to be on this hybrid or flexible path like we are doesn't have the answer. The answer is going to emerge over time through continual iteration and improvement of the model.
I love that answer. And that's why I asked it, right? Because there's always things you can iterate, experiment, and prototype on. Same question we get with AI, right, Nolan? Some of these questions, like, I can't really do much with AI. It's this, there's always something you can experiment with.
Yeah, Ian, I think it's pretty contrarian today, though. Like the live and work policy, when you guys launched it, was essentially, call it like in the middle of when everybody was going remote because of COVID. And now the inverse has happened. And, specifically, if you talk to investors, I think every investor now is genetically coded to say, well, if you're not in the office, we're not going to write the check. I'm hearing that all the time for early stage tech companies. And yet it seems like you and really Coinbase are the only two companies that are like, nope, this is the future of work. This is how we're going to continue to do this. I'm curious of like, is there a pull from the other side, from Brian or from others? Like, we don't have enough in-person time and that's hurting our ability to get things done.
I think there's more of us than just Coinbase and Airbnb. There's a small alliance of us that are kind of like sharing learnings, because it's a harder choice to make, right? To say you're going to commit to this hybrid or flexible approach, I think it requires orchestration. Frankly, it requires me and my team to absorb the complexity of that design problem. Because because if we don't absorb it, then we leave it to the employee, and then the employee decides to turn up on a Monday and none of their relevant coworkers are there, and it's a rubbish experience. So why would they bother coming into the office, right? So I think what I'll say is I deeply believe we need to do the right thing for Airbnb. Whatever makes Airbnb stronger is the right thing to do. We have seen tremendous gains through deploying and improving a live and work anywhere approach. We've continued to see, we do annual engagement surveys. We've continued to see incredibly high levels of engagement, right? 86% of employees would recommend Airbnb as a great place to work, largely because of a lot of the flexibility that we afford them through the Live and Work Anywhere program and all the policies and support systems that go underneath that. Attrition is at kind of historically low levels. And I acknowledge that we're in a slightly funky labor market right now, but attrition, a lot of actually the reason why our attrition is trending lower than you might expect, we attribute to the fact, and we hear from our employee base, it's because we're giving them the flexibility to choose the best way to do their work that really meets their needs as well as the organization's needs. And what we're finding with the things that we're doing in more intentional gathering and these in-person weeks, we began to ask questions in our engagement survey around actually how effective are we at problem solving and collaborating? And we're getting really good feedback and sentiment from the organization that the intentionality that we're building into the gathering is actually helping us spend the right amount of time, right? The right amount of time doing the in-person work. So it's not like 5 days a week. 5 days a week is just, it's just a number, right? The reality is it's about the right amount of time doing the right work. And when you can play with that complexity and when you can absorb that complexity on behalf of your employees, I think there's huge outsized benefits. So we have no intention to go back. I only intend for us to continue to kind of like move forward and continue to learn and evolve how we're doing this to make a fitter and healthier organization.
Yep. It's very contrarian in today's world. And two things I'll leave you with is, number one, nothing drove me crazier than the open office work plan to where you could just get no work done when you're in the office. And then number two, the best talent has extreme agency. And so they can choose. And those people are consistently choosing companies that enable some sort of flexible work policy to where they don't have to be in the office every day. And it's not just to hang out with their kids or do laundry, which I think is what Twitter says. It's to get shit done at home because it's a more effective environment to get work done that you can do by yourself without collaboration.
2 points you made. I just want to really highlight. One, we see it too. Like our ability to tap into the best talent, right? Most diverse talent into the different talent pools across the US and globally. Our ability to do that through this is just unparalleled, right? Compared to where we were before, when such a majority of the employee base had to live within commuting distance of San Francisco. I mean, it was a crazy choice to be making if you think about how we used to live in that world as well. So we're certainly seeing that the best talent has the agency that you're describing, and this is allowing us to attract and retain that best talent over time. The second is just so true, which is when you need to do deep work, when you need to write that memo, or you need to really consider that report that you're pulling together, I would much prefer to do that at my kitchen table here, right, where I'm talking to you today, than in an open plan office. But when I need to influence the senior leaders in the decisions they're making, it's much easier to do that in one of our cafes when I literally interact with someone for 7.5 minutes and I accelerated a piece of work by 3 weeks. And so again, it's consistently modulated by what's the type of work and what environment does it need? Does it need asynchronous collaboration or synchronous collaboration? Is it better done in person or is it better done digitally?
Yep. Well, Iain, thank you so much for the time. I think Airbnb is one of the most interesting case studies in how a company manages their people and their employees today. And we'd love to have you on in a few more months to check in and see how things are going.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to spend time with you both.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.